Hey everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Lynn Farlin. I have the pleasure of serving as the Canon for formation for the diocese and one of the members of the revival planning team. And I'm thrilled that we have Lynette Johnson with us tonight. Society of St. Andrews has been a really powerful partner for us as we have been addressing food insecurity with our pre-revival events. And our hope is that partnership continues afterwards. Part of why we did food insecurity as a way for our diocese to engage was there is no place in our diocese that is not touched, right? Not just our diocese, but the world, right? This is an issue that as followers of Christ, we all have an opportunity to engage and hopefully try to partner to do something to address food insecurity. So we're really happy that you're here. If y'all would indulge me, I'd like to start us with a brief prayer, and then I'm going to introduce Lynette, tell you a little bit of what I gleaned from her bio. And then I'm going to turn it over to her, and I'm going to just monitor the chat. So if we could take a moment to pray. And this prayer comes from Education for Justice, and it was out of a project of the Center for Concern. And it was written for food drives, or it's actually a portion of a longer litany that was written for food drives. Let us pray. Gracious God, nourish our world with hope and call your people to the table of cooperation. Bless our efforts to work for food security and eliminate hunger so that all might know a harvest of justice. May our attempts to end hunger not be politicized or prophesized, but realized in the sharing of our daily bread. We ask all this in Christ's name. Amen. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Lynette Johnson. She is the executive director of the Society of St. Andrews. She became the executive director, and if I'm saying any of this wrong, Lynette, stop me. But in 2017, right, beginning of the year 2017, right? But that's not your whole tenure. You had worked with Society of St. Andrews since about 2010, right?
Correct.
First in Nashville, she was telling us a little bit about this as we were waiting for folks to gather tonight, where she served initially there as the regional director for Tennessee and Alabama, and was credited really with extending their gleaning network and oversaw day-to-day operations that resulted in putting 14 million servings of produce on the tables of folks living in Alabama and Tennessee. Think of that, 14 million servings. It's amazing. And did that in a very short period of time, and then was called to the national headquarters where she where she worked with Director of Church Relations, and that allowed her to work with congregations throughout the country dealing with St. Andrew's ministry and resources and volunteer opportunities. So we have a connection in that she's a church educator, right? Has a background in Christian formation, has served as a supply pastor. I found this fascinating that you had another life as a magazine editor and art director, and that you're a certified Christian educator and ruling elder in the Presbyterian Church. There are some local connections, though, bachelors of arts from William and Mary, right?
Right.
So close by, and Bachelor of Arts in Religion. And then she also holds a master's in Christian education from Scarrett Graduate School. My friends, let me introduce you to our friend and partner from the Society of St. Andrew, Lynette Johnson.
Well, thanks very much. Glad to be with you all tonight, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about hunger within the footprint of the Diocese of Southern Virginia. So I'm actually going to talk relatively little about the Society of St. Andrew. If we have time at the end, we can talk about what we do a little bit more, but this is really about you all and the hunger needs within the footprint of your diocese and what you can do to address them. Okay. So about how many people within the footprint of this diocese do you think don't always have enough to eat? And you're all muted, so you can't tell me. But the answer is about 280,000, a little bit over that. And on average, if you look at Feeding America's Map the Meal Gap, which is the number of meals that folks are falling short, that they can't afford, that Feeding America is not meeting, that the federal government is not meeting, that they're just really scrambling to find food. These 280,000 people are without food or looking for food for about 5 months of the year. According to Feeding America, their food budgets fall 471 meals short in a given year. And that's per person, not per family. So that's a level of hunger that was a lot higher than I thought it would be in your area. So then that raises the question, I am okay, and okay is not the right word, I am not outraged if blank people within the footprint of this diocese are sometimes hungry. We could fill that in with a number of people. So 280,319 hungry people. We start with 0 hungry people and go all the way to everybody who's hungry. Where's the needle land? At what point do we start being outraged? And how many people is it okay to have hungry? And then another way we could look at it, instead of a number of hungry people, and this is let me just tell you a brief Society of St. Andrew's story as we get to this next slide. We will sometimes have farmers who offer food to us, and they'll talk all about the food that they want to offer, and then we'll hear, but I don't want it to go to those people. And if we asked questions, we could find out who those people are that the farmer does not wish to feed. But we choose not to ask the questions. And what we choose to do is to ask the farmer to be their better self. And so we'll say, well, you called us to offer this food. Who were you thinking you'd like to feed? And they might say, well, hungry children or hungry seniors or veterans or homeless people. And so whoever they say they want to feed, we'll say, we'll look for an agency that's serving that population first and make sure that they get some of this food. And then we don't discuss who it is that they don't want to feed. So we could look at the types of people that we are okay if they're not fed. So transgender people, indigenous people, people with mental illness, LGBTQ people, substance abusers, dishonorably discharged veterans. And some of these words are words that I might use, and some of them are words that are used by people who have certain opinions and prejudices. So Asian bums, formerly incarcerated, obese people, illegal aliens, unwed mothers, lazy people, people who don't want to work, people with learning differences. So I'm okay if a certain type of person is hungry. And if we're not okay that people are hungry, whether we look at it by number or by type, then with 280,000 hungry people within the footprint of this diocese, we've got a lot of work to do. I think it's a myth that there are people who are deserving, whether poor or rich. It is through no fault of my own that I was born into a middle-class family with 2 parents who graduated from college. Or that someone else was born into a family with a parent who was a meth addict. We had nothing to do with that, and neither of us deserves anything. So I gave us a nice little quote from Romans 3 there, that we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, but it's by God's grace that we have anything. And you all might remember from the musical Finian's Rainbow, the song is, when the idle poor become the idle rich. And in documents that I've given Lynn that she can send out or have available for you later, I've got the words to it. But when a poor man loses on a horse, he's a gambler, he's a rambler, he's a loser, and a lot of dirty names. Whereas when a rich man gambles on a horse and loses, isn't he the sport? And it goes on and just gives different examples of how people who have money and those who don't are treated differently for doing the same things. Highly recommend it. All right, so if grace is foundational, then we pretty much need to believe that everyone deserves to eat every day. And what that really means is people need regular access to food that they can afford. They need enough food, nourishing food. They need choice in foods. They need food that is appropriate for them culturally, religiously, and medically. They need fresh quality food with dignity in selection and dignity in purchasing. They need safe food storage. They need a place and time to eat at least 3 meals daily. They need freedom from fear or threat around food or eating, and a lack of stigma over food choices. And so when will we be doing enough? When will we all be okay? And when can we let go of outrage around hunger? And that might be when everyone in our community has regular, affordable access to the types and quantities of food that they and their families need in order to thrive. Another one of the documents that I have available that Lynn will give you is I actually broke down every county and city within the footprint of the diocese, the number of folks who are hungry and the number of meals that they're lacking. All right, so whose responsibility is it to see that hungry people have enough food to eat? Who's doing enough and who should do more? Hungry people themselves, the government, or the charitable sector? And these next few slides have way too many words on them, but I couldn't figure out any way to give you the content without putting all the words on the slide. So United Way gave us a term a few years ago called ALICE, Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. So it's an acronym for people who are at risk for hunger or who are living on the margins. So ALICE would be a hungry person who's really doing all they can. They might be working 30 hours a week or close to 30 hours a week at a minimum wage, which is now $12 in Virginia. And probably not working more than 30 hours a week at a minimum wage job, because most minimum wage employers want to avoid paying benefits. And if they're working 30 hours or more, they might have to pay them. And actually working 30 hours a week at minimum wage puts someone above the poverty line. Poverty line is in the 14,000s and that salary would be in the 15,000s. If we look at two places within the footprint of this diocese, Emporia and Chesapeake, in Emporia, they could in fact rent a 1-bedroom apartment. It would be about 70% of their income. And with that other 30%, they would have to deal with everything else that life demands. They were in Chesapeake, they couldn't even rent a 1-bedroom apartment. That's more than they would make in the course of a year. So they'd be couch surfing or living with family or sharing a 1-bedroom apartment with a roommate. And for all of that, they would get the princely amount of $1,258.49 a year in SNAP food stamp benefits. So a little over $100 a month. And that's if they keep their job. Without a job, you've got, I think, 3 months of food stamp benefits before it starts getting questioned. So just to point out to you that if people who take the mortgage deduction on their federal income tax because they're wealthy enough to own a home, that mortgage deduction averages $5,000. And yet the people who get the mortgage deduction, it's considered something that they're owed or that they deserve. And we holler and scream about paying people or giving people $105 a month in food benefits. So over the course of the year, it's going to be way less than what someone who's getting the mortgage deduction receives. So if we can agree that folks who are hungry are probably doing everything they can already to provide for their food needs, that leaves us two other options, the government and the charitable sector. And I think that most people just simply don't realize that the government is providing 9/10 of food aid in this country. Charitable sector is providing 1/10. And that's actually up from 5% that the charitable sector was fulfilling a few years ago. But if the federal government pulls back what it's doing, that leaves an increasing burden on the charitable sector. And I don't know what you all are seeing in your churches. I know what we're seeing at the Society of St. Andrew is that the pandemic did a number on church income. There's less and less of it, and it's got to do more things. So that is a piano falling on the charitable food sector in this slide. To provide for all of the missing meals after government programs and Feeding America are done, just for the hungry people in this diocese, over $500 million a year. And that would assume $12 a day. So we could make it less than that if we wanted to give them less, but $12 a day is a low reasonable amount for food as far as I'm concerned. So if you'll hold on to that $500 million number in your head, this is a complicated slide. Where I want to show you is the left side. The right side, the pie chart shows you all of the charitable dollars that were given in 2021 from every source. And then I've broken it out for the individuals and for congregations, because congregational giving is coming from the individuals. It's individuals who give to congregations and then congregations who give to other causes. So if you look at the funnel on the left side of this slide, $143.8 billion was given by individuals to congregations in 2021. So that 143.8, 143.2 was spent in direct religious work, the stuff that congregations do. So paying for your rector and any other staff that you have, covering the cost of keeping your building up, materials that are needed for classes and other things, paraments and whatever else is done for the church. It also would include money that's given by the churches within their own denomination or faith tradition. Some money that your congregation sends up the line to the diocese or to the Episcopal Church nationally for its work would be included at 143.2 billion. So this is every congregation of every denomination, 110,000 churches in this country. What was left over for charitable work from churches was 632.8 million across the country. And we said 527 million was needed to feed hungry people just in this diocese. So that's a significant disconnect between the amount of food that's needed to feed hungry people nationwide versus what congregational giving can do. So that's not just Episcopalians, that's everybody working together. So studies that have been done have shown that congregations with an annual budget of up to $200,000 generally give 1% of their total budget to charitable causes outside the church itself. And of that 1%, 75% is allocated for local causes, 25% for national causes. So that would be $500 to $1,500. Well, $500 for national level work and $1,500 spent locally for all causes on average. And then for churches that are budgets of over 200,000, they tend to give 2% of their total budget to mission causes outside the congregation itself. And again, it's the 75-25 split. So charitable sector dollars alone can only meet a minute fraction of the need that's out there which doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And obviously there are more charitable dollars than just church dollars. Funds to meet hunger needs are constrained. Some of the constraints are which party is in power at the federal and state level, stock market and investment earnings. I know I've gotten 2 notes from people so far this year, which strikes me as not very many notes, saying that because their investments are down, they can't give to Society of St. Andrew this year. Generosity and altruism are constraints, hopefully in a good way. The efficiency and effectiveness of the human service agencies that are meeting needs are a constraint. The wages and hours of people who are hungry themselves. Right now, inflationary pressures on food. Food is 10% more expensive now than it was a year ago. And another constraint that you have to think about is puppies, kittens, natural and other disasters. If you see an SPCA commercial with those poor dogs that are out in the winter, you might want to send your contributions that you have available to the SPCA to help rescue the dogs because they look so sad. And I really don't think anybody's going to show you a picture of people looking as sad as those dogs look. So how the needs are presented makes a difference in what people give and to what causes. And certainly natural and other disasters make a difference in where money goes as well. So following the instructions on the shampoo bottle gives you only wet, clean hair. The shampoo bottle says to lather, rinse, and repeat. So if we keep doing things the same way that we've been doing them, we're not going to resolve the problem of hunger even within this diocese. If providing food for today is the only solution, and I say that as someone who provides food for today, it's one piece of the solution, but it is not the whole solution because the needs are going to continue to vary and grow as all of those constraints operate on them. The only way that we're going to change how much hunger needs to be met is to change the way we think about hunger in a larger systemic way and the way that we address it. So, what if we work to reduce the need rather than simply trying to meet it? What are some things that we might do? We might work on affordable housing, on living wages, on healthcare that is decoupled from employment. We might choose to increase the Social Security pay-in for higher income individuals, guarantee a livable Social Security payout for all. We might provide greater childcare subsidies. We could increase taxes on generational wealth. We could eliminate the mortgage deduction. We could provide universal school meals. So these might not all be things that you would agree with, but they're all things that could help reduce hunger needs in every community across the country. So then the question is, how can you as an individual, how can your congregation, and how can your diocese amplify its voice, leverage its resources to push for the systemic changes that are going to eventually reduce hunger need? So while we're continuing to work to feed hungry people today, we really need to take the parallel step of working to reduce that need through the systemic changes. I see there's another chat.
I was just asking Lynette if you maybe wanted to pause for questions.
Sure.
I don't know if anyone has questions. We're sort of just about at that halfway point. So I just thought I'd see.
Yeah, sure.
I have one that I'm just struggling with. $12 a day, right? I'm scribbling down notes as you're talking. $12 a day, eating on $12 a day. That doesn't. I mean, there's food, and then there's healthy food, then there's sustainable food. $12 a day is not talking about a healthy diet, right? It's bare minimum calories.
Oh, well, your $12 a day is royal eating,
Is it? Okay.
according to the USDA. So the standard, what they call the thrifty food plan allotment, is about $3.50 a day. And there are 4 levels within the USDA food program. We actually had moved to a doubling of that $3.45 during the pandemic, and that the pandemic increase went away March 1st. So we're going to see a huge increase in hunger in the coming months because that benefit dropped. A single mom with 2 kids lost $285 a month in food purchasing power March 1st. So that's really significant. There is a link. I did not print it out for you, but when you get the slide deck, the page that talks about the $527 million needed to meet hunger needs in this diocese, there's a link to an article that describes each of those 4 levels of potential benefits from within the USDA's thinking. And their benefit levels, as I recall, max out at around $8.50 a day is what the USDA really thinks is the most that anyone would need. So
Wow. Wow.
So my $527 billion is estimating based on $12 per day. So the USDA would get you by with a little more than 1/4 of that. But
that's ridiculous.
well, yeah. We have a cookbook that we make available at various times that's how to cook on $4 a day. But the challenge to that is if you're going to cook on $4 a day, it assumes that you're eating every meal is a home cooked meal, that you have a pantry full of staples that you can pull from to do most of the meal lifting, that someone has the time and the resources to be at home to do the cooking. You've got working stove and stove top, probably working microwave, you've got refrigerator space. It assumes ridiculous things that for someone who is really living on the margins, who, is barely making ends meet before a crisis comes along, who may have to ride the bus to get to the grocery store and then bring those groceries home in their arms, or they're shopping at a corner store that has very few healthy foods and everything has a premium price on it because of the location. There's no way that they can make that $3.50 a day go anywhere. And of course, one of the other things that we lost recently was the universal free school meals that were instituted during the pandemic. One of my coworkers has a daughter who's a junior in high school in Lynchburg, Virginia. And she was given a SNAP EBT card at the beginning of the summer of 2021. And her daughter handed it to her and she didn't know what it was for. And she didn't want to spend the money because she thought it must belong to someone else, even though her own name was on it. But what the city of Lynchburg did for its students was it gave them an allotment of $391 each for meals over the summer. That was how they provided their school meals over the summer of 2021. And my coworker just Thursday of last week got word back from social services that yes, that was a real card and she could spend it. So that was intended to feed her child in the summer of 2021.
Lynette, Kay O'Reilly put in the chat that her food pantry has seen new records every week since those SNAP benefits, those SNAP emergency benefits ended, and they served 574 households last week. Okay, that's Eastern Shore Chapel, right? Do I have that right? Yeah, in Virginia Beach.
Unfortunately, I think that's going to be exactly what we're seeing. The increase in benefits that went in during the pandemic really kept hunger need from rising throughout the pandemic. But now that the pandemic is over, inflation has done on us worse than what the pandemic did almost. So the loss of the extra benefits that were put in are going to be just devastating.
Hmm.
And again, the charitable system just can't make up for those losses.
Does anybody else have any questions, or if you're all right, we'll just have Lynette go on. We just wanted to pause to give you an opportunity. If you have a question, feel free to either raise your hand or put your question in the chat.
Question. With them assuming that everybody has, those that are in need have cooking facilities and that kind of thing, in order to make use of the $8 or whatever a day, what happens to those people who do not have those facilities? How do they cope with that? Or has anybody even looked at that? Do they even know how to cook? Do they even know how to turn the stove on or turn the microwave on? How is that even being addressed by anyone, or what?
Well, that's a multifaceted question with lots of different answers. So in many rural communities, people who are hungry would be offended if you suggested they should attend a cooking class, because cooking is something that they've learned how to do through generations. It's been, passed down, and what they're lacking is the resources, not the knowledge of how to cook. Yet in some more, there certainly are also rural people who have no clue how to cook, but in more urban areas, you'll find folks who don't know how to cook, whose parents didn't know how to cook. They may not have kitchen facilities or pots and pans, measuring cups. Spending $3.50 on a bottle of cooking oil is not something that you're likely to do if that's your whole allotment of food for a day. Mm-hmm. So some of the really basic things that could go to help people prepare meals are things that they may tend to go without. I think it would be a huge service for more churches to offer kitchen pantries but in addition to food pantries. So measuring cups, the pots and pans, plates, silverware, things that people need in order to cook. One of the issues with the high price of housing is people are transient. They may be couch surfing and they're not free to use the kitchen in the home of the person that they're surfing with. And they also tend not to move their supplies with them as they go from place to place, or it's buried somewhere deep in the car that, the next time they get to a stable location, they'll be able to find. So I do think that kitchen pantries that are churches having kitchen pantries where people could go to get those things, and even, bags of flour or containers of cooking oil, salt and pepper shakers, even things like that would be things that would help their food taste better when they prepare it at home, and make it more feasible for them to do so. But I also will note that certainly generationally, we've had a change in the vegetable vocabulary. So my grandmother, who would be 110 right now, where she's still living, grew 2 acres worth of garden until she was 90. And she grew everything under the sun, from rutabagas and parsnips on. And she cooked them, she ate them, she preserved them. She had a whole room in her basement devoted to things that she had canned. And so my grandmother was a scratch cook with a very large vegetable vocabulary. Interestingly enough, my grandmother worked outside the home until she retired. My mother did not work outside the home ever. And she was a scratch cook also, but her vegetable vocabulary may be half of what my grandmother's was. We ate a lot of, beans and greens and that sort of thing. But we didn't go in for the rutabagas and the parsnips and the beets. And then as a single mom of 3 kids, I cooked exactly the things that my kids would eat and nothing else. So my kids grew up with a much smaller vocabulary still. It's been interesting that they've discovered farmers markets and have been increasing their vocabulary of vegetables. But I do think that is an issue for us when at Society of St. Andrew, when we're distributing food, that we want to be sure if it's going in a food bag, that it's something that the people who are receiving that food bag will know how to prepare.
Yeah.
A daikon radish is something that might get thrown away because someone doesn't know what it is.
Yeah.
So we try to match food with agencies. And if it's going to be something that's not familiar, then we would tend to send it to a shelter where it could be prepared into a dish and served, as opposed to handed raw to someone. And the other thing we also do is we look for immigrant and refugee communities for which that vegetable or fruit might be a staple culturally of their diet. And we can provide it to them in quantity. We, in Charlotte, North Carolina, for years and years, we had a tilapia farmer that every other Friday gave us a truck full of live tilapia. And we had a volunteer who lined his truck bed with tarps in such a way that the water and the fish could all be in the back of the pickup truck. And they would take them to a community where Hmong refugees lived. And they would come with their 5-gallon pickle buckets and scoop out the fish in the water and take them home. And that was their protein for the next week. And they were delighted to get the live fish. I'm guessing that most people in my neighborhood would not be delighted to get live fish.
Well, I hear you on your parents. Mine were the same way. We weren't a rich family. Sometimes we just barely survived. But my grandmother and my aunt grew a garden. My aunt had chickens. My uncle had pigs. My grandfather did potatoes, and we just shared with each other. So food was never really an issue. Other things were an issue, but food was never really an issue. My grandmother and my mother canned and froze. So, we could make it go. But then I'm thinking of one snowstorm that we had here, and people were getting concerned because they couldn't get pizza delivery. And they had no idea that they could cook food in their apartments on the stove that was in their apartment. And I thought, so do we need to teach them how to use these things first before, doing food? Or we have a program in town called backpack program, and we make sure that kids on need get those items. But the request is nothing that has to be heated up, things that can be eaten straight out of the package, as healthy as you can get, things that don't require a can opener. And that's when I also realized some people don't even have can openers. How are they supposed to get into the packages? And how are they going to live? We all know that if kids don't have a healthy diet, they can't learn. And it's like, how the needs are so overwhelming. How do you even go about addressing some of it?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's back to my original slide about, I'm okay, or I'm not outraged if this many people are hungry. It's hard for us to live in that constant state of outrage that we need to live in order for change to happen.
Lynette, I'm not seeing any questions, so feel free to go ahead. I didn't want to throw you off track.
Okay. No, that's fine. I'm actually near the end of my presentation.
Okay, great.
So resources that are available to amplify your voice: the Episcopal Church Office of Government Relations, Bread for the World, the Alliance to End Hunger, and the Virginia Interfaith Center for Public Policy are all organizations that have resources that I'd recommend to you to use. And then I'd say make a one-to-one commitment to take direct action and advocate for systemic change. work with people who are hungry, invite them to a dialogue or into dialogue, include them as you're thinking of what needs to happen, so that it's not people who have deciding what people who have not should have, and how they should live, how they should eat. Involve the community in making decisions, and inspire people to take action. Vote and take a friend with you to the polls. Voting does seem to make a difference. And then don't ever assume that you know what's best for people in your community who are struggling to put food on their tables. Ask questions and listen. And we received a grant in Alabama last year that we are using to create listening sessions in various parts of the state, because there are some counties in Alabama that have one grocery store or no grocery stores. And the traditional way of approaching getting food into those areas with very little infrastructure for food distribution is to send a mobile pantry from the food bank in once a month. The problem with that is that county has a single grocery store, and if 50% of the people in the county are living in poverty and they're getting food from the mobile pantry that comes by, then they're not using the grocery store. And a better outreach for them that they might understand and that makes a world of sense would be to improve the SNAP benefit outreach, so that more people are enrolled in SNAP benefits, that they're able to shop at the grocery store, which would provide jobs as well as keep that store open for other people in the county to use. So listening to people who are living with the situation can help really find better ways to address the response. Back to that original question. I'm okay, I'm not outraged if how many people within the footprint of this diocese are sometimes hungry. And that's a question that each person, each congregation needs to answer and figure out a response that you can make in a sustainable way that will make a difference for the long term. So when's it okay to let go of outrage? When everyone in our community has regular, affordable access to the types and quantities of food that they and their families need in order to thrive. That's when things will be okay, and we no longer need to be outraged. I wanted to use this picture of a table to talk just for a second. For years and years, I used the metaphor of extending the table when I talked about being sure that everyone had enough food to eat. And the image in my mind was, the big family Thanksgiving or Christmas meal where everybody comes and we crowd around the table, and there's the kids' table in the next room. And, when cousin Janet shows up unexpected with a new boyfriend, somebody finds 2 more chairs or an ottoman for them to sit on, but there's room for everyone at the table, and we find a place for everyone to sit. I think when we use those images of extending the table, we're starting from the wrong place. We're starting from a place that assumes that I own the table or you own the table, and we're making room at our table for those people to come and eat. I think we'd be better served if we thought about it as God's table, where all are welcome and where our place is no more assured than anyone else's. But it's God's extension of the table, not ours. And we're not being the beneficent people, I guess, making room for those who have less to come to the table, but we're all equals at God's table. And I think it's important to think of hunger in our community and people in our community in that way. So anyway, I have this litany for us to conclude with, and I'll just read it to you. People will come from east and west and north and south. Perhaps God has called us for such a time as this. They will sit down and feast at the table in the kingdom of God. We cannot enjoy the feast until everyone is at the table with us. Neither will they say, see here or look there. It is not enough that some should be fed. The kingdom of God is among us. The table is set for all. Let everyone eat their fill. The kingdom of God is in our midst. It is within us. All are welcome at this table. God's abundance must be shared with all. Amen.
Thank you, Lynette. The answer, Jennifer, to your question is there is a handout, and we'll post all of this next to the recording on the Revival webpage, so you'll be able to see all of the handouts as well as the slide deck that Lynette put together. Lynette, we're seeing. I went to a session at a Christian formation conference, and one of the challenges they had was how many churches have all of this amazing grounds, right? That really fertile, amazing grounds that they spend a fortune to mow and prune and tend. And they just asked the question, what if those spaces were used to help feed, right? Or what if those spaces were used to allow community members to have a garden space, not like your grandmother's, right? But still a space to tend and grow. And so I think sometimes looking at things maybe from a different perspective, right, is I think sometimes helpful. The Episcopal Church does have some great resources on creation care, about like creation care gardens and things like that. But it struck me because the facilitators said, how many of you have, couple acres that someone comes and faithfully mows, and is there any possibility that it could be used in some other way? In some cases it's a hard no, but in others there might be some possibility.
Yeah, so edible churchyards are definitely something that's coming in, and even if you don't plant your whole churchyard to feed people, you could do landscaping with edible trees, so fruit trees of some sort. In Tennessee, the Tennessee Titans Stadium, right outside the stadium on the little buffer between the drop-off and the parking lot, it's landscaped with Juneberry bushes. Well, Juneberries are like blueberries, only a little bit larger, slight almond taste to them, and they're about twice as nutritious as blueberries. And most landscapers, they do it because they're beautiful bushes. They don't stop to think about the fruit that this is growing that can actually feed people. So we had the most wonderful time every spring going to stand on the manicured lawn at the stadium and picking those Juneberries to give to the Nashville Food Project. So, great food for hungry people. Another thing that two things that we promote that go along with that. One is that we distribute seeds free of charge every spring to people who have land for planting and don't have resources to purchase seeds, or for school or community gardens or church gardens. So we would be able to provide seeds and seed potatoes if your congregation was interested in starting such a project. And then related to that, we promote a program that we call Share Our Surplus, where your backyard gardeners in your congregation would bring their surplus to church at whatever time of your worship service, and just put them in the narthex, some area outside the sanctuary on a table. They could leave a love offering that would go to hunger missions, but also take whatever they wanted. And that way, if there are people who visit your congregation or people in your congregation who may be hungry, they can take food with no stigma attached to it. It's just there for the taking for for all because we're sharing our abundance. So we've got resources for that program as well. It's fairly simple and then we suggest that whatever's left over at the end, you take to a local food pantry that we can help you find if you don't have one in mind already.
So Lynette, we're gosh, that went fast, right? The time went really, really fast. I imagine that we can stay around for questions, but I did want to see if you wanted to say anything else about the Society of St. Andrews. There's some, I mean, if you all haven't visited their website, oh, please do. Great resources, great. There's films for formation that you can use about just the incredible waste that happens in our society because things aren't pretty at the grocery store. Just amazing opportunities to do gleaning programs. We just hosted the produce drop, but amazing organization to partner with. And those are just the things I know about, Lynette. What else would you want people to have as a takeaway about Society of St. Andrew?
Well, for sure, I tell you that about 40% of the food that's grown in this country is never eaten in the midst of all the hunger. And that's food that's overgrown because farmers have a certain sale contract that they have to meet, and they will lose everything if they don't grow at least enough to meet the contract. So they'll grow more in case there's a problem, you know, a drought or a flood or a pestilence, or some of it grows to the wrong size or wrong color or whatever it is. It's also sale contracts may be exclusive, that the farmer can only sell the first ear of corn on every stalk. So the second and third ears, which they're not as nutritious as the first ear or as large, but they're still perfectly good to eat and nutritious. The farmer's not allowed to sell them because their sale contract is exclusive for the first ear. And sometimes there's just food left over after the labor is finished. So the farmers contracted the labor for a certain length of time. And if they'd stayed around longer, they could have run another pass through the fields, but they weren't able to do that. So there are lots of reasons why that food goes to waste. And that's really what the Society of St. Andrew is all about. Where we started was the biblical concept of gleaning. And now what we tell farmers is, when you hear yourself saying, it's a shame this good food has to go to waste, that's when you call us. Mm-hmm. They want anything that they could sell. If anything, we want to help them increase their sales and improve their bottom lines. But we will come in and glean what's left over after harvest. And what we find are a couple of things. One is, in terms of nutritional value that we're providing to individual hungry people, the average hungry person may get 10 servings of food from us. So that's not turning their life around by any means. It's useful food for a couple of days. But when we provide $17,000 worth of food or $200,000 worth of food to feeding agencies, that's making a real difference, because we're giving it to them free of charge. It's making a real difference in the number of people that those agencies are able to feed on a steady basis throughout the course of the year, because they can use the money that they save by getting fruits and vegetables from us to provide proteins, milk, dairy, other things that their clients need as well. The other thing is that people who glean with us look at the food system differently. If you want people in your congregation to become advocates for systemic change in the food system, you need to bring them gleaning with us. Because once they've spent a morning in a hot field, stooping and bending and picking and digging fresh produce, they understand what farm workers are going through. They have a better sense of how difficult farming really is as a profession. They tend to then begin to see food differently, whether that's they start shopping at farmers markets so that they can buy directly from a local farmer, so that their money is staying local in the food system instead of going to a national chain perhaps. They also will take that food. We have people take the food to a local feeding agency. And so it can put a face on hunger in their community that they may not have seen before. You know, we say, take this to the pantry that's at 4th and Main, and they had no idea there was a pantry at 4th and Main. And they may stay then to help prepare the food and serve it, eventually ending up on the board of that agency, maybe even eventually ending up on our board of directors. But that's people who glean with us, their lives change in ways that they could not have expected. And we have a mission work camp program called Harvest of Hope that we do summer programs for young people. They go out and glean in the mornings. And then in the afternoons and evenings, they learn about the problem of hunger in the US and the world. And then every group makes a pledge and a plan to do something about hunger in their own community when they go back home. We have people who show up to glean now, today, who participated in the Harvest of Hope program 25 years ago as teenagers. And it still is something that they remember and that they talk about. And so they want to glean now and be involved again. It really is a powerful ministry, and I really recommend that for you all. So we do have a gleaning coordinator in the Tidewater area. We have gleaning coordinators in Southside Virginia arranging gleaning. And then we've just opened gleaning on the Eastern Shore of Virginia with a new office. It's based in Salisbury, Maryland, but gleaning all the way from Accomack and Northampton counties up through the state of Delaware. And that organization on the Delmarva, we opened in July, and they had already distributed 130,000 pounds of food by the end of the year, starting from zero.
Wow. Yeah, Lynette, I think when we were talking about having you do this session, I think I mentioned to you that I did one of those workshops, right? The gleaning workshops, and I still can think of, talk about powerful. We were just there for a weekend, but the language that the students came back with, the language that the leaders came back with, I still can see one of them who came back into our Sunday lunches and put a big bin out and said, I want you all to be mindful of how much we waste in our church meals. And she's the one that talked, right? She's the one that provided the education and put the bin out by where the trash cans usually were. And it started because she went on one of those gleaning events. And so I would echo what you said, powerful opportunity and just education, right? When a farmer holds up two different potatoes and says, what's the difference between these two? And you realize one's destined for the trash because the contract with the potato chip company says they have to be a certain size, or they have to, they have to look a certain way. So it's just great stuff. I can't say enough good about your organization, and just the really good people who are willing to partner with you to help others understand. It is formation is at their heart as well as feeding. So I appreciate what y'all do, Lynette.
Yeah, and online we're at endhunger.org.
What, did I put the wrong thing in there?
Oh, I didn't see what you put in, but endhunger.org is correct, if that's what you put. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any last minute questions for Lynette? We appreciate y'all coming out.
I want to thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Rick. All right, y'all. We'll hover for a little bit if there's any last questions, but absolutely appreciate y'all coming out. Do know that revival is happening on April 22nd. It's going to happen at Ogden Hall at Hampton University. We have a number of opportunities for folks to volunteer at various food banks, but don't just let the ones that we have up be the only opportunities. That you can always partner with local food banks. And then we're also going to do, this is going to be post-revival, but we're going to do a diocesan-wide food drive to try to help put some more items on the shelves at local food banks. So lots of ways to continue to engage. And we really appreciate you coming out and talking about this topic with us. And Lynette, thank you so much. We absolutely appreciate you and value your time and what your organization does as well. Many thanks.
Well, thanks for the opportunity.
All right, y'all, blessings. Have a good night.
Bye.